Mr. Seeley, we are in UK, Westminster. What's happening here this morning?
No, thank you. So the current political situation in Togo today is known by the whole world. The whole world knows what is happening in Togo. A country where, we've got a president called Faure Gnassingbé, who has led the country together with his father for over half a century now, nearly 53 years. So Togolese crisis is today, very serious. It is alarming. And this morning, the case has been brought into the Parliament, and we've heard from the Minister of State, we've heard from our local MPs. Their answers were being rhetoric, but we are hopeful. Today's visit really, is kind of a leap of faith. We will carry on putting the pressure on the UK government, to work with their counterparts and make sure, the violations of human rights, the violation and the abuses are stopped. Today the average Togolese person lives on $2 a day. That is totally unacceptable. A country where only, the minority has monopolized the wealth of the country that belongs to all of us. Unemployment is sky high. The education system is not working. The health system is severely affected, where children and women are not getting the right treatment, hence leading to unnecessary deaths. And we think this is totally unacceptable in this day in age. So we're really happy that the case has been brought today to the Parliament. And like I said, we are very hopeful that we will get the right answers in due course.
Thank you very much.
I beg to move that this House has considered the human rights situation in Togo, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Howarth. I'm very grateful to be given this debate, although saddened by its necessity, but necessary it is, as I wish to raise the serious and worsening human rights situation in Togo. At the present time, according to the Foreign Office website, the United Kingdom does not have permanent representation in Togo, but covers it remotely from Ghana. And in her response, I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline how that current system works, because I have a number of constituents from Togo who say that the system is ineffective. The human rights abuses occurring in Togo rest heavy on the shoulders of those of my constituents who left that country to settle in the UK. Because although they may be far from home, news of the continued abuse of their relatives and fellow countrymen and women faced at the hands of the authorities and security forces reaches them nearly every week. Not only do the authorities heavily curtail people's right to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly for peaceful protest, it has also been well documented that security forces use excessive force against demonstrators. Last year, Amnesty International stated that during one of the mass demonstrations organised by opposition groups, at least 11 people were killed by security forces. In addition to this, random arrests, detentions, torture and other ill treatment of prisoners, human rights defenders, journalists and civilians continue. In Togo, it appears that human rights violations continue with impunity. The government and the security forces have a blatant disregard for justice and the rule of international law. I will.
Thank you for bringing this matter to Westminster Hall for consideration. Would anybody not agree that the shocking report of the death of a 12-year-old in the run-up to the elections in December in Togo is an example of the fact that human rights are still being suppressed at great levels in Togo? And we in this House must do more to encourage human rights, possibly by using, and I put this forward as a suggestion, by using the Tongolese ambition to be a Commonwealth member nation as a way of influencing what is happening there.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, particularly because it gave me time to get breath, because I've just run all the way across the estate. And it's not for many things that a 63-year-old woman would run across the estate, but I would for human rights in Togo. And the issues of the election are very important, and I'll touch on them later. Last year, Amnesty International stated that during one of the mass demonstrations organised, at least 12 people were killed. In addition to this, as we've heard, random arrests, detentions, torture. It appears in Togo human rights violations continue with impunity, The government and the security forces have a blatant disregard for justice and the rule of international law. Now it's time for the government of Togo to practice what they preach and fulfil the promises that they have made to the United Nations, the international community, and most importantly, the promises that they've made to their people. Togo is a United Nations member state. As its protocol, the UN conducts a universal periodic review to review the human rights records of all United Nations member states. The first cycle of the UN Universal Periodic Review of Togo took place in October 2011. Of the 133 recommendations that were made, Togo rejected a number, including a recommendation to amend or repeal the laws used to crack down on journalists and human rights defenders, a recommendation regarding the protection of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people within their country, and a recommendation regarding the inclusion of laws which criminalise defamation. There's been some progress in the ratification of crucial international instruments. However, there is so much more to do, and it is imperative that Togo lives up to recommendations that it has agreed to within the Universal Periodic Review, not just on paper, but in practice too. Togo was elected to join the Human Rights Council for 2016-18 and was expected to use this mandate to strengthen its human rights commitments. Combating the issue of torture was one of the key recommendations made in the review. Although the country ratified the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture by rolling out capacity strengthening workshops to combat torture for criminal investigations and prison and rehabilitation officers, torture remains in the country, used by security forces against participants in anti-government demonstrations. Many members will be aware that between August and December 2017, the authorities continued violent crackdowns during mass protests. These protests were led by the political opposition, calling for, amongst other things, the end of President Faure Singbe's tenure as president. Freedom House is an independent watchdog organisation which dedicates itself to the expansion of freedom and democracy around the world. In their country overview in 2018, they stated, Togo's politics have been dominated since 1963 by Uk-Tdm, apologies for the pronunciation, Uk-Tdm and his son, the current president. Advantages including a security service dominated by the president's ethnic group, disproportionately drawn election districts and a fractured opposition have helped the president and his party hold on to power. And in 2017, protests calling for the reintroduction of term limits were harshly repressed. The president has been in power since 2005. His predecessor, his father, held on to power for 38 years before his death. Claims of the repression of protests which call for the reintroduction of term limits is supported by many human rights organisations and institutions. According to Amnesty, protests were met with excessive use of force by the security forces. Amongst other instances, security forces used live ammunition in 2017 to disperse a protest against rising oil prices in the country. Several people were injured and many were surprised that only one death was recorded. In June 2017, videos posted on the internet showed members of the security forces armed with shotguns beating students on the ground with batons at a student demonstration. The demonstration was calling for improved living conditions. This outrageous act occurred at the University of Lomé within their student union. As if this wasn't enough, security forces arrested at least 19 students, 17 of whom were later released. Several students stated in court that they had been beaten during their arrest and transfer. At other demonstrations, members of the political opposition held mass demonstrations in major cities across Togo. There are reports that these demonstrations were broken up by security forces again, who used tear gas, batons, water cannons and live ammunition. It is simply not humane to use water cannons to disperse crowds, most certainly not for people who have a right to peacefully protest under the Declaration of Human Rights, which Togo became a signatory to on the 20th of September 1960. One of the main things that Togo seems to have refused to address or improve was the authorities' repression of people's right to freedom of expression. I'd like to thank the Minister of State for the attention she gave to me in her written answers that she's already provided to me. In November last year, the Minister responded to one of my written questions on Togo, saying that the UK government supported the President of Ghana and that they encourage both the government and the opposition in Togo to work towards ensuring that the elections to be held on December the 20th would be free, fair and void of violence. As many will be aware, sadly the election was anything but. According to various news sources, in the days leading up to the elections, many people were killed by security forces. Despite advice given by Ghana and the UK, protesters still gathered and organised demonstrations in the lead up to the elections, which in turn flared violence. 14 opposition parties joined forces to call on their supporters to boycott the elections amid fears that the President would put forth legislation to allow him to run again in 2020 and 2025. During the mediation talks held by Ghana and Guinea to resolve the crisis, the opposition asked for an overhaul of the Electoral Commission and to set term limits, but this was not to be. Elections are a major source of contention and strife in Togo. But how many more people will be arbitrarily arrested and detained, and how many more people will tell us their tales of torture simply because they exercise the human right to freedom of expression?
And will have real concerns about friends and family still in Togo. Does she share my concern in particular about the repressive cybersecurity law that the National Assembly recently passed, which human rights campaigners around the world agree will have a chilling effect on freedom of expression?
I thank the Honourable Friend for his intervention, and I do have major concerns about that. If people aren't free to access information and communicate with each other, it puts Togo in the same position as many other regimes, such as China. This is a country whose government beats its opposition for expressing dissent and silences its media and journalists. In November, the Minister replied to a question I raised and said that the UK government recommended that allegations of arbitrary arrest and detention and allegations of torture be investigated thoroughly. Reports from Amnesty and other human rights organisations dispute that this has taken place in Togo. So I would like to ask the Minister 5 questions, of which if she cannot answer now, I would request that she just sends me a written response. The first question is that I would ask the Minister, what can and what will the Foreign Office do to encourage Togo to end their security forces' excessive use of force and for their authorities to respect the rights of people to peaceful protest? The second question is, does the Minister join me in condemning the Togolese government for shutting down the internet and for contravening Article 19 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights? And the third question is, will the Minister tell me what assistance the UK is giving to support human rights defenders and civil society in Togo? Question number 4, can the Minister tell me how the Foreign Office might encourage Togo to ensure that perpetrators of human rights abuses are held accountable and prosecuted in a court of law? And the final question is, will the Minister ask the Togolese government when the High Commissioner for Reconciliation and Strengthening National Unity will action the plan to implement the Truth and Justice Reconciliation Commission's 68 recommendations? The 10th of December 2018 marked the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Togo is a signatory to this declaration. On paper, Togo says that it is doing the right things to show that it cares about and is committed to human rights values and principles, and I've touched on these things throughout my speech. But in reality, the government and the security forces fail to adhere to human rights standards. Togo seems to be a country open to improvement when it comes to its human rights failings. This is why it was elected to the Human Rights Council. However, we seem to be dealing with a government that makes assurances to protect human rights and adhere to human rights standards one day and abandons these values when they think that nobody is looking. I will.
To congratulate her on this excellent debate. The UN and to a less degree other international organisations are somewhat distant from Lomé. Would she agree that it would be a good role, in addition to the leadership Ghana is showing, for the Economic Community of West Africa, ECOWAS, to take a greater role in Togo and providing some leadership as to what the international community wants? Because actually that kind of local, regional leadership sometimes works better than distant people from New York telling individuals how to run their country.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I agree this isn't a job for just one country, it's a job for many, and the UK alone can't act but the UK, together with others, can. And anybody who can put pressure and alleviate the suffering of the people of Togo, I think...
Indeed, the treatment of detainees and the lack of protection for LGBTI people is a continued matter of concern. So we believe that we have said to the government of Togo that they must now step up and deliver real progress on human rights, including progress on the ECOWAS roadmap, and that this will benefit all of the people of Togo.
The question is that this House has considered human rights in Togo. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. With a bit more enthusiasm.
L'esclave qui n'est pas capable d'assumer sa révolte ne mérite pas que l'on s'apitoie sur son sort. Cet esclave répondra seul de son malheur s'il se fait des illusions sur la condescendance suspecte d'un maître qui prétend l'affranchir. Seule la lutte libère.
No,
yeah, certainly.
Certainly write to the minister. They sent a lot of messages and I wrote around all of them saying, would you be interested in trying to...
No reason for them to be prison, they are ill-treated and all that.
Trying to have a debate and only Mackie to reply.
I mean, the minister was talking about, the UK having a representation in Africa. And when we had this meeting with ECOWAS, Nana Akufo-Addo, president of Ghana, and were the mediators, and they put together a roadmap, and the recommendation in that roadmap, none of those recommendations were followed. It was all disregarded, and they went ahead, and carried on with the elections in the 20th. This is really disappointing. So it'd be really good, like something said in there, it's not just about, talking about Africa, it's time to walk. We need to see some concrete actions, Those are the practical steps to help us.
Yeah, it was my intention after this debate tonight. MPs tend to respond to their constituents more than they do general campaigns. But I know Steve and what we can do, and I know that Matt is because he came along. So Matt didn't feel... Right, anyway, great to meet you all.
Thanks for all your effort.
He doesn't know that much about it, but he said it's great to meet you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, good to see you. All right.
Okay, have a good day.
But he's not here, he's my MP.
Oh, is he? Right, okay.
So his half-brother was killed in Togo.
Right, okay. So that's
Given
what
that,
we need to do.
Theresa is advising that...
If you get all of your network to write to their MPs and say, were they aware of this debate? What will they do? If there's a future debate, will they come and attend? That sort of thing.
Okay.
And what we should try and do, I'll speak to Emily Thornbury, who's our shadow foreign election, and ask her if she maybe will raise it in foreign election questions. Okay. Because you've just got to keep raising it.
Yeah, keep raising it.
It takes years, as you know. But the more you bother them with it, the more they might actually
come out.
Not, because they give us answers, but they're not really answers. Anyway, I've got to go.
All right, thanks, Theresa. I really appreciate your help. Thanks for all your effort.
Ouais, monsieur David, nous sommes en Angleterre, plus précisément à Westminster, aujourd'hui le 8 janvier 2019. Et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé ici exactement?
Ce matin, un groupe de citoyens togolais sont venus au palais de Westminster pour contacter les membres du gouvernement britannique pour participer au débat qui a eu lieu sur la situation au Togo. Et ça fait plus de 50 ans que la situation au Togo dure et que le gouvernement togolais est en train de brimer la population, que tout marche mal, l'économie dégringole, la santé dégringole, l'éducation ne marche pas et il est temps qu'on fasse changer les choses. Et c'est pour ça que nous sommes debout et que nous luttons et que nous allons finalement vaincre ce gouvernement. Merci.
Et vous remercie. Monsieur David, nous voici à la sortie du débat de Westminster. Monsieur Dravi, veuillez m'excuser. Nous voici à la sortie du débat avec les parlementaires. Quels sont vos espoirs et comment vous avez pressenti le débat et qu'est-ce qu'on peut en dégager selon vous?
Moi je crois que ce qu'on peut retenir pour la journée d'aujourd'hui, c'est que le travail des uns et des autres a payé. Et ceux qui ont pris le temps de parler de la situation du Togo à leurs députés respectifs ici et qui ont finalement amené ce débat au Parlement britannique. Je crois que ça c'est la victoire d'aujourd'hui et l'opportunité qu'on a eue en tant que citoyen togolais d'échanger avec les officiels anglais par rapport à la situation qui prévaut dans notre pays. Vous voyez, nos frères, nos parents sont au pays et nous sommes inquiets de ce qui se passe et nous sommes très contents de l'oreille attentive que ces officiels nous ont prêté par rapport à ce qu'on leur explique, ce qu'ils savent déjà, mais aussi ce que nous on a pu ajouter aux informations qu'ils ont. Et donc l'espoir c'est qu'ils vont, comme ils nous l'ont promis, vous voyez, essayer d'aller encore plus haut dans le gouvernement pour pouvoir faire une certaine pression sur le gouvernement togolais afin que les choses puissent changer. Et donc nous croyons que nous sommes sur la bonne marche.
Les Burkinabés se sont battus. Et ensemble, ils ont pu se libérer d'un pouvoir vieux de 27 années. Les Égyptiens, comme un seul homme, ils se sont battus et ils ont libéré leur pays, dirigé de main de maître, de près de 40 ans. Par Moubarak. La Tunisie s'est libérée de Ben Ali. Alors, je suis convaincu que les Togolais vont également libérer le Togo. Souvent, il y a des citations, man.